Room 214. 6:45 a.m. A nurse named Priya hasn't slept in 19 hours. She hears the elevator ding. She doesn't even look up. She already knows who it is. Every Tuesday and Thursday, an 80-year-old man walks these halls before the sun's fully up. Not a patient, not a doctor, just a man named Walt, carrying a bag of hard candy and a folding chair. He has no medical training, no official role. The hospital doesn't pay him $1. But ask any nurse on this floor who they'd call first in the middle of the worst night of their career. Most of them will say his name before their own supervisors. Walt Reyes served 2 tours as an Army medic in Vietnam, a fact almost nobody at the hospital knew for the first 3 years he'd been showing up. He didn't advertise it. He didn't need to. What people noticed instead was simpler. Walt showed up, sat down, and stayed. He'd retired at 68 from a long career running a small hardware store, the kind of ordinary post-service life a lot of veterans quietly build for themselves. His wife, Dolores, passed 2 years into his retirement. The house got quiet fast. Walt has said, more than once, that the quiet was the part he wasn't prepared for. Not the loneliness exactly, but the sudden absence of anyone needing him for anything. 6 months after Dolores died, Walt visited a friend recovering from surgery at Ridgeview General. He noticed the man in the next bed had no visitors at all. Nobody had come by in 4 days. Walt stayed an extra 20 minutes and talked to him too. He came back the following week. Then the week after that. Nobody assigned Walt a schedule. He built one himself, informally, the way people build routines when nobody's telling them what to do, but they've decided something matters anyway. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 6:30 a.m. sharp. He starts on the 3rd floor, oncology, and works his way down. He doesn't approach every room. He's learned, over the years, to read the small signals. An empty visitor's chair gathering dust, a whiteboard with no family names written on it, a patient who glances at the door every time it opens and then looks away when it's just staff again. He carries butterscotch candy because it was Dolores' favorite, and somewhere along the way it just became his signature. Patients who've been there a while know to expect it. He carries a small folding chair because standing conversations, he says, always feel rushed, and rushed conversations aren't the point. He doesn't talk about himself much. He asks questions. Real ones, not how are you feeling, but what did you do for work, you got grandkids, what's the worst movie you ever walked out of? Small, human, ordinary questions that most hospital conversations don't have room for anymore. Priya Anand has worked the oncology floor for 6 years. She remembers the first time she really understood what Walt did. Not the visits themselves, which she'd grown used to, but what happened in room 214 with a patient named Robert. Robert was 83, alone, dying, and had gone 4 days without speaking a full sentence to anyone according to his chart. Priya had tried. The chaplain had tried. Robert answered in single words, if at all. Walt sat with him for 40 minutes. Priya, passing by to check vitals, heard actual laughter coming from the room. The first she'd heard from Robert in the 2 weeks she'd been treating him. She asked Walt afterward what he'd said. Walt shrugged, told him about the time I got yelled at by a nun in basic training for laughing during roll call. Man's got a filthy sense of humor once you get him talking. Robert passed away 11 days later. His daughter, flying in from out of state too late to say goodbye in person, later thanked the hospital staff for keeping him company. Nobody on staff corrected her. Walt wasn't staff. He was just there. Another nurse, Denise Okafor, keeps a small notebook, unofficial, personal, where she's written down moments over the years that she calls, only half-joking, Walt's sightings. A teenager terrified before his first chemo session, calmed enough by Walt's terrible card tricks to actually laugh. A woman convinced she was a burden to her family, who spent 2 hours talking to Walt about her garden and left the conversation, according to Denise, looking like herself again for the first time in a week. Walt doesn't offer explanations easily. It took a hospital chaplain, Father Michael Doyle, nearly 2 years of occasional conversation before Walt said anything close to a full answer. In Vietnam, Walt had been a combat medic, one of the soldiers whose job wasn't to fight, but to reach the wounded first, often under fire, often when there wasn't time to do anything but stay with someone while they were scared. Walt has talked, sparingly, about a specific memory, a young soldier badly wounded, who didn't need medicine Walt didn't have. What he needed, in his final conscious minutes, was simply someone sitting close enough that he wasn't alone. "I couldn't save everybody," Walt told Father Doyle. "Sometimes all I could do was stay." Turns out that's still mostly what people need. Even here, even now, Walt has said he doesn't think of the hospital visits as continuing his service. Exactly. He's careful about that framing, uncomfortable with anything that sounds like he's making the story about himself. He simply says it's the only job he's ever had that made complete sense to him without needing to be explained. Sitting with someone who's scared. Staying until it's not as bad. He did it in a jungle 50 years ago. He does it in a hospital hallway now. For years, Walt's visits existed entirely outside any official hospital structure. No badge, no volunteer coordinator checking in, no formal recognition beyond staff quietly appreciating what he did. That changed when a new hospital administrator, reviewing patient satisfaction surveys, noticed an unusual pattern. An anonymous, unprompted mention of the older gentleman whose visits appeared in survey comments far more often than any actual hospital program or service. Patients weren't asked about Walt. They brought him up anyway. The administrator, curious, asked around and eventually tracked down who staff were referring to. Ridgeview General offered Walt an official volunteer badge and a formal role. Walt accepted the badge, mostly, staff say, because it made hospital security stop questioning why an 80-year-old man was wandering the halls at 6:30 in the morning. He declined every offer of formal recognition beyond that. No plaque, no feature in the hospital newsletter, nothing with his photo on it. "I'm not here to be thanked," Walt reportedly told the administrator. "I'm here because Tuesday and Thursday, somebody on this floor probably needs company more than they need anything else I could give them." Nobody quite remembers who started calling Walt their angel first. It's the kind of nickname that seems to have arrived from several directions at once. The way affectionate nicknames often do among people who work impossible hours together. Priya says it started as something close to a joke. Walt showing up right as a particularly hard shift began, like clockwork, like something arranged rather than coincidental. It stopped being a joke, she says, somewhere around the 5th or 6th time he appeared at exactly the moment someone on the floor needed a reason to believe the day might still go okay. Denise's notebook, the one with the Walt sightings, has a new title now, written on the inside cover in her handwriting. "Things Our Angel did this year." She says she'll probably keep it going as long as Walt keeps showing up, and she's not particularly interested in what happens to that plan once he can't anymore. Walt is 80 years old now. His knees give him trouble on stairs, so he takes the elevator these days instead of the stairwell he used to prefer for exercise. He still shows up Tuesday and Thursday, 6:30 a.m., folding chair and butterscotch candy in hand. He's outlived Dolores by 12 years now. He says the hospital visits are, in a strange way, the closest thing he has to a marriage left in his life. Something he shows up for consistently. Not because anyone's checking, but because that's simply who he's decided to be. "People ask me when I'll stop," Walt says. "I tell them the same thing every time. I'll stop when I can't make it up the elevator anymore. Until then, Tuesday and Thursday, I've got somewhere to be." If this story moved you, remember, you don't need a title, a badge, or anyone's permission to be the reason someone's worst day feels a little less alone. Subscribe to Quiet Heroes for more real stories about the people quietly showing up when it matters most. See you in the next one.